Jim Klauck, aka Checka Pro Joe, here on the Checka Pro Radio Show. I've got my good friend Paul Doane joining me. You've seen Paul here before on the program. He's a ventilation expert here in Texas for your attic to keep your electric bills low and to keep you more comfortable. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Great to have you here as always. We hear this passive, active attic ventilation. What is the difference between passive and active?
Great question. Great question. So let's start with the passive ventilation. So anytime you are looking at a roof on a home, typically, if it's a standard attic construction, you'll have the attic with it, underneath the roof line and above the living space. And within that attic space, they have attic vents, and those attic vents allow air to passively enter and air to passively exit that roof. And that's important because with no ventilation, that attic would just get scorching hot. It would have no ability to breathe and relieve the hot air that gets built up and get cool air in. So passive ventilation is standard for traditional homes with traditional attics and roof lines. Now, the level of how much passive ventilation is going to vary from home to home, but it's critical to have at least some passive ventilation. Now, when we look into the active ventilation side, that would be getting into an attic fan, where the attic fan can spin the fan blade and it creates drafts with inside the attic, and that's actively ventilating the attic. Now, in our climate, it's in Texas, it's so hot and it's so humid that active ventilation is a must. Passive ventilation is a necessity for active ventilation to work, but our climate is so hot that passive ventilation isn't enough anymore. You have to actively force the heat out. You have to actively move the air to reduce the humidity. And if not, then you're going to suffer from all the pain points that a hot, humid attic gives. Excess heat dumped into the house, AC bills driving up, you're spending more and you have reduced comfort, and just doesn't make sense. And so that's kind of the breakdown, Jim, of passive ventilation. Those are the vents that allow air to come in and out of your attic freely. And then active ventilation is when you install an attic fan system on your roof line or within your attic, and it can actively pull that air out.
Yeah, it's like the difference between a sailboat and a power motorboat.
Great point.
Right?
Yeah,
Because one's kind of organic. It kind of just does what it does through nature. It moves. So on the water with a sailboat, you get some breeze and you're going to move along. Your attic, you get some breeze, or just from convection, you're going to get some movement in your attic through the passive. But if you've got like two 100 horse outboards on the back of your boat, you just throttle up and you're moving along. You can throttle up a powered attic fan. Same type of thing, right?
Yeah, no, great analogy. And then now I would add to it and say, okay, well, what's our mission on our boat, on the sailboat, and on that active ventilation motorboat? Well, we want to get to the comfort zone the fastest possible and save the most amount of money. And so if we can rely on passive ventilation or the wind to blow the sailboat, great, but it's not always there to have our back. We want to be able to have that control and make sure we can get to our destination where we're comfortable and we're saving money when we want it. And so that's just where our climate's at. It's so hot that passive ventilation isn't enough to actually give the performance that we're looking for. You got to actively force the air out.
Yeah. And so many of us here in Texas don't have good coverage from trees or other buildings. There's just so many of us with our roof just exposed to the sun. I mean, if you look down from outer space, our roofs are just exposed for the most part all over Texas.
And they're a stationary object. I think about this all the time, is that they're just stationary object, and they just sit there and soak up the heat. The roof line gets hot, soaks through the roofing system. The attic starts turning into an oven-like boiler room where it gets excessively hot, up to 50 degrees hotter than the outside ambient temperature. And again, we have that passive ventilation, and we might get gusts of wind to be able to have cool air come in. Typically, a roofing system has lower venting where cool air comes in. and they have upper venting where hot air rises within the attic and it exits the upper venting. And it does, passive ventilation does ventilate the attic, but just too slow for our goals to stay comfortable and save money.
Yeah. Paul, as always, thank you so much for your expertise here on the show.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.